Hi and welcome to another very exciting tutorial. I've learned that many of you would like to see more animations tutorials, so today we're going to create kind of a circular transition which will allow you to display a menu or another interesting feature of your application. So what we're going to do is we have a menu button right here. This image is just so that it looks a little nicer. And once we press it, we get this nice circular animation transition. And this would be the place where you could add your menu or another interesting feature of your application. And once we close that down and dismiss that view controller, it shrinks down again with this circular animation to our menu button. So again, this is what it looks like, and this is what we're going to create today. Let me just give you quickly another hint for Swift Tutorial Conference. It's only 5 days left that you can purchase the early bird conference bundle. And with the conference bundle, you get a lot of stuff. You get all of the recorded tutorial sessions, you get the complete source code so that you can apply all these interesting things that you can learn at Swift Tutorial Conference in your own applications. So like speech recognition, the Sprite Kit usage for Apple Watch, CloudKit, and so on. We have a fully packed program of 2 days, and all of that will be placed into the conference bundle, plus a lot of more bonus material. And also this conference bundle, if you purchase it, you support all of the conference speakers, which are providing their knowledge completely for free. So this is what you get if you purchase the conference bundle. If you purchase it now at the early bird price with the coupon code in the info box below, you will just pay around $25 or $26, and you can only do that until August 31st. And also the other bundle prices, one that starts at September 1st, this is the standard price for $99. And if you want early access to the conference bundle, so as soon as the sessions of 1 day of Swift Tutorial Conference are over, you will directly get access to those videos and also directly get access to the source code. And you can even support all the speakers even more if you purchase this early access bundle. So with that being said, let's jump right into our today's project. So I'm going to launch my Xcode beta version, which is currently beta 6, so that we can use the newest Swift code or the newest Swift version available. And I'm pressing Command-Shift-N to create a new single view application. Let's call this Circular Transition, and let's place that directly on the desktop. Let me make this a little bigger here. And the first thing that we want to do is actually set up the user interface. So we go to our view controller, and let's place directly a second view controller here. Let's start with the image. So let's bring up an image view and position that to fill the whole screen. This is not necessary, as I said, it's just to look better. But what we can have a look at is one new feature of the newest version of Xcode, which is the rebirth of auto resizing masks, which we can use to just spare some layout constraints for an easy setup such as this. So we pin our image view to all 4 sides and also make those 2 arrows active, and with that the image view resizes with the view or with the view controller for every screen size, and we can do that in the size inspector. So with that being done, let's add the image that I've prepared. So let's open the image assets, just drag and drop that right into the assets, and let's maybe rename it to background BG. And I'm just using the 1x version now for demo purposes. And then let's choose that image here in the attributes inspector and insert that right here and make sure to set it to aspect fit. And then we get this image nicely centered in our view controller. And then for our button, we will simply use a standard button here and place that somewhere around here. And all it says is M. And then we will give it a nice size. Let's maybe say 40 by 40 pixels. Let's choose another background color for our button, maybe this orange here, or let's choose a little nicer color, maybe something like this. And then let's make the text color white, and the font size, let's just increase that a little bit to 17, and then we'll make this heavy, and by that we've created our menu button. And again, we can use in the size inspector the auto resizing mask, and we simply have to uncheck this left constraint here, and then as you can see, it's always positioned in the center of our view. And all that's left now, let's simply copy our button and paste it in the second view controller and position it kind of in the correct position. And as you can see, we're 50, let's change that to 50 in the Y position. We're 50 pixels away from the top, so let's do the same thing here, and it's already centered. The auto resizing mask is correctly set. So all that's left to do here is enter an X, so that we can make sure that this looks like a dismiss button. And with that, we've already set up the user interface correctly. To make our buttons look round, we will do that in code. And let's just create real quickly another ViewController class, which is a Cocoa Touch class. Let's call it second subclass of UIViewController, and hit next and create that. And then we'll move back to the storyboard, make sure that we've selected our second view controller, and set the second view controller as the custom class for that. And then we'll make a quick connection between our first view controller and the second view controller, being a segue. So I press Control on the keyboard, drag it to my right view controller, and select Show. And with that, we've already connected our both view controllers. And then let's also maybe create an outlet for our button right here, opening up the assistant editor, creating an IB outlet for, let's call that dismiss button. And to make it round, all we need to do is take our button in view.load, it's the dismiss button, access its layer and its corner radius, and to make it round, all we need to do is take the button's frame, its size, and then its width or height, since it's a square button, and divide that by 2. And that's it. And with that being done, let's move back to our view controller. Here we could actually do the same thing. So let's add a menu button here as an IB outlet. And right here, let's use our menu button, the layer, the corner radius, and let's again use the menu button, its frame, size, and width, and divide that by 2. And if we now run our application, we should be able to see a nice circular button here. And once we press it, we have a standard animation here, and we can't yet dismiss our view controller. So let's quickly correct that. Going into our second view controller here, control drag to our assistant editor. Let's maybe call this dismiss second VC. Make sure this is an action, connect that. And all we need to do here now is call self and dismiss animated with no completion. And let's run this again. And with that being done, let's have a quick look here. So we have our circular button, we press it, we get a standard animation, we press the X and it moves down again. And now it's time that our animation looks a lot nicer. And to do that, we will create a new class. So let me just quit the assistant editor and press Command N on my keyboard, create a new Cocoa Touch class, and we will call that Circular Transition, but not as a subclass of UIViewController, but of a very simple NS object. And we will do all of the work actually related to our circular transition right here. And this is going to be a very reusable piece of code that we're going to create here. So you could just drop that in any of your projects and just reuse that. And the first thing that we're going to need in our class is a circle. So let's create a circle property here, which is a simple UI view. And what we're also going to need is a starting point for the animation. And by standard, this is going to be just a CG point at 0, so 0, 0. But we'll make that a computed property and make sure that when we call didSet, or when we change it, that what we do is we take our circle and center it at the starting point when we change that property. We could actually also add public and for a public here in front of all of those properties to make sure that we can only access the right properties, but for simplicity's sake, we won't use public and private right here. And we'll move on with the next property, which is a color for our circle. So let's call that circle color. And the standard value for that is going to be white or whatever you want. And then let's also make sure that we have a duration for our animation, and I'm going to set that to 0.3 seconds. And then we will create an enumeration for our transition modes, because there are several transition modes. We could present a view controller, we can dismiss a view controller, and so that you can also use that together with a navigation controller, we'll also make sure to take the pop transition mode into account. So let's call this circular transition mode, which is going to be integer, and then we have the different cases, which are present, dismiss, and pop. And with that, we have completed our enumeration here, and then all that's left to do is creating a property for the transition mode, which is of the kind circular transition mode, and as a default value, we will simply choose present here. And then, so that it's a little cleaner here, we will create an extension of our class, which is the circular transition class, and we will subclass UIViewController Animated Transitioning and put all the functions in here. And what we are going to need this UIViewController Animated Transitioning to use some delegate methods, which are transition duration, and we'll simply return the duration here. And as you can see, we still get an error because we haven't implemented all of the required protocol functions. And so we use animate transition. And this is where we'll write all the animation code. And when we build that now, we shouldn't get any more errors, as you can see here, because we've implemented both required functions, which is transition duration and animate transition. And in order for our transition to be animated correctly, what we will need first is a container view for all that we are going to do now. So let's create one container view, and we'll get that by using our transition context and access the container view that acts as the super view for the views involved in the transition, as you can also see in the code completion here. And then all we need to do actually is check what kind of transition mode we're in. So we can check here for the transition mode. And if it's equal to present, we'll do all that is required to presentation, and else we'll check that later what we will do if it's dismiss or pop. So with that condition set, we can first of all check if we get a presented view, or a view that we are going to present in our transition. So we'll create an if-let statement here. A presented view is what we are going to need, and therefore we use the transition context, and then we get a view for a specific key. And as you can see, this is a UI transition context view key, and you could choose both a to key and a from key. So we're going to use the to key here since we're presenting. And with that, we make sure that only if we get such a view for the presented from the presented view controller, then we're going to do all of the steps that are following. And we are going to create two constants here, one for the view center. So we use the presented view and its center, and then also the view size. And we get that from the presented view, its frame, and its size. And then we will just make sure that we have a completely new UI view. So we simply reinitialize that here for our circle. And then let me just make some space here that we can see more of our code here. So we have our circle now. And then it's time actually to set the frame for our circle. And the position or the size of our circle kind of depends on the screen size. So we need an offset for, or an offset vector for the area that we're going to use to cover the complete screen. And we're going to write an extra function for that. So let's make some more space again here. And let's just call that function frame for circle with an original view for with the original center of our view. So with view center, which is a CG point, not view venter, but center. We will also need the size. So let's call that view size, which is a CG size, and a start point or an origin point, which is a CG point. All right. And with that done, we will simply have to return a CG rect for our frame of the circle. And then we have to calculate get the X length, which is a max value. So we check two values. We check the start point's X, and we check the original or the view size and its width, and subtract the start point and its X position. And we will choose the bigger one of those two values, and we'll do the same thing for the Y length. So let's again use fmax with the start point dot Y and the view size dot height minus the start point dot Y. And with that done, we now can calculate the offset vector that we are going to need. So we will do a simple operation here with using the square root and the square of our X length and the Y length, and by that calculate the distance between 2 points. So what we're going to do here is we use the X length times the X length plus the Y length times the Y length. And then we'll multiply that by 2 so that we don't only use half of the screen, but that we use the whole screen. And then we create another size object here, which is CG size. And we'll use that with width and height, with the offset vector and the offset vector. All right. And with that being done, we can simply return a CG rect as it is required by our function with an origin, which is CG point 0. And with the size that we have just generated. And that is all that we need now. So let's just quickly build that. And this seems to work pretty good. And then we can move up to our circle again and set the circle's frame. So let's use the circle, set its frame, and then we will simply use the frame for circle with our view center, with our view size, and with our starting point. So how did we call that? It's just starting point. All right. So, and with that we have to frame for our circle. Now it's time that our circle becomes a circle, and we do the same thing that we did with our buttons already. So we take the circle, take its layer, access its corner radius, and then again use the circle and its frame and its size and its height or width, it doesn't matter really, and divide that by 2. And then we use the circle again, set its center to the starting point that we have defined. And while we're at configuring our circle, let's also set its background color. So let's choose the background color here and set it to the circle color, which is one of our properties in our class. And also let's add our circle to the container view. So we use our container view, add a subview, and add our circle to it. And for the animation to work, what we need to do is actually transform our circle and shrink it down. So we use the circle, not the circle color, access its transform property, and then use CG affine transform, and then this is a little different in comparison to older versions of Swift. Now we use this initializer to define a scaling factor, and we use 0.001 here, and again 0.001. And with that being done, we've completely finished our, let's maybe move that up a little before we add it to the subview. And with that being done, we can now configure our presented view. So let's also do that. The presented view and its center position should correspond with the starting point of our animation. Also, what we need to do is we need to transform the presented view again. So we can actually copy this transformation here and do the exact same thing. And then we also want the presented view's alpha value to be 0 so that it's invisible at the beginning. And then what we do is we take our container view, add a subview, which is the presented view. All right. And with that done, we can actually start animating. So we use UIView and animate with duration, with animations, and a completion handler. And we need a completion handler to later tell our transition context that we have really completed our animation or our transition. And we will now, first of all, use the duration property as the time interval for our animation. So let's take the duration here. And our animation is really pretty simple. So what we do is we use our circle and we access its transform property again, and this is animatable. And then we use the transform again and simply assign its identity, which is the original form and the original size of our circle. And by assigning that, it's going to increase its size. And then what we also want to do is the same thing for our presented view. So again, this is the CG transform here and the identity. And then we also want to make our presented view visible. So we access the alpha value, set it to 1. And what we also need to do is take the presented view and change its frame, or much more change its center to the view's center that we have accessed earlier when we got the presented view's center. And that's actually all there is to our animation. And now we simply have our completion handler here. We define a success argument here, and we will then use our transition context and call complete transition. And if our animation succeeded, we can simply pass along our success here. And if for whatever reason it didn't succeed, complete transition will also be false. So before we continue, let's maybe remove all those empty lines here. And now it's time, before we can have a look at what we've just done, we will also implement the dismiss or pop animation. And for that, we first of all need a transition mode key, which we can simply get if we check if our transition mode is equal to pop. And if it is, so we simply use a question mark here to switch between those two cases. So if it is, if it's the pop transition mode, then what we want to do is use the UI transition context view key 2. And if it's not, then it must be the UI transition context view key from. So now that we know what kind of a transition mode we're in, we can create a returning view. And again, we use an if-lat statement to make sure that we also have a view and only perform our code below if we really can work with it. So we use the transition context again. We use the view for a specific key, and then we can simply use the transition mode key constant that we have defined one line above. And then we will do pretty much the same thing as we already did with the present animation. So first of all, we get a view center. We use our returning view and its center. We get a view size. We use the returning view and its frame and its size. We use our frame for circle function again. So we get our circle, access its frame, call the frame for circle function, we use the view center, we use the view size, we use our starting point, and with that we have our frame in place. Now we again access our circle and make sure it's round. So again, the corner radius, circle, frame size, height divided by 2. We take our circle, set its center to the starting point, and then we can start with our animation. So we again use UIView, animate with duration, and with the completion handler, we have the duration property in our class. We will use an animation now. We use the circle, and we have to use self because we're within a closure here. So again, use transform. And this time we don't want to scale it up, we want to shrink it down. So in this case, we use the make scale, and this time again here 0.001 and 0.001. So we shrink it down instead of assigning its identity, and we do the same thing with the returning view, transform, and we again scale it down, and then we must make sure that the returning view center is the starting point. So let's use self.starting point, because that's where it should shrink to. And the last thing that we want to do is we want to set its alpha value to 0 so that it becomes unvisible. And now there is one thing left that we need to do and need to think about, and this is if our transition mode is equal to pop. What we want to do here is we want to take our container view and insert a subview below a subview, because we have to think about that in case you would use a navigation controller. So we take our returning view and place that below the returning view, and again we take the container view, insert the subview below a subview, and we take the circle and place that below the returning view. All right, and with that done, we can now create our completion handler again with the success argument. We'll use the returning view and its center, and set it to the view center again. And we use the returning view and now can finally remove it from the super view because we don't need it anymore. And then we will do the same thing with our circle. So we also remove that from the super view. And just as we did with the present animation, we will now use the transition context and tell it that we have hopefully successfully completed our animation. So we pass along this parameter or this argument that we get from our closure here. And that's actually all there is to it. And now that we have created our circular transition class, it's time to use it in our ViewController. So let's move back to our ViewController. And the first thing we need to do is actually adopt the UIViewController Transitioning Delegate, which will give us two important delegate functions, which is animation controller for the presented view controller and animation controller for the dismissed view controller. So let's adopt that right here. And let's also create an object for our transition. So transition, and this is going to be a circular transition. So we can actually just initialize that here. So just circular transition. And if we build that, this should already work pretty nicely. And then we'll add the two delegate functions that we actually need, which is the animation controller for dismissed view controller. And let me just add that on top, the animation controller for the presented view controller. And all we need to do now is take our transition object and assign its transition mode, which is, in the case of the for presented view controller, is presented. For our transition and its starting point, we will use the button center. So we use our menu button and its center. And for our circle color, we will simply use the button and its background color. And we have to unwrap this since this is optional. And then we can actually just copy all there is. Just let me simply return that transition here. And then we'll copy all that code paste it right here, and instead of present, we will use dismiss right here. And that's actually all there is to it for the animation controller, for the dismissed and the presented view controller. And what we still need to do is actually implement the prepare for segue function, because we're using a segue and we have to configure the transition delegate for our second view controller and also change the modal presentation style. So what we do here is, first of all, create an object for our second view controller, and we can simply get that by using the segue and its destination property, and then we'll force downcast that to the second view controller. And then we'll simply take that second view controller and configure its transition delegate and assign that to self so that our two delegate functions here do have a use. And then what we also need to do is set its modal presentation style to custom, since we're using a custom presentation here. And actually that's all there is to it. We can now give this thing a try and run our application in the simulator. And let's see what we get. So here we are, and I press the menu button, and there it is, our nice animation, but it doesn't look so good yet because it's somehow overlaid by this white color, and this doesn't look so good. So let's move back real quickly to the storyboard, and what we should definitely do here is change the background color to this orange that we used, and change the background color of our button to white, and of course the text color then to the orange again. And with that, let's rerun our application and let's enjoy this animation. And if you press Command T, you can see it in slow-mo. So I press M now, and here we go. Isn't that nice? And let's close that down again. So I think this is pretty nice, and you can use that in hopefully many different cases. Let me know in the comments below for what you would like to use this animation, and if you at all can use it for something, and also let me know if you would like to see more of these animation tutorials. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you next week.